I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome to a special episode of Ohio Politics Explained. Today, we're going to talk all about this year's Ohio Supreme Court elections. Now, the presidential race is, of course, getting a lot of the attention, and Ohio also has a really competitive Senate election. But the court races are just as important, and I have Laura Bischoff with me to help explain why. Hello.
This is a special episode.
So, there are 3 Supreme Court seats up for grabs, and it's not as straightforward as you might think. 2 incumbent justices, Democrat Melody Stewart and Republican Joe Deters, are fighting for one of those seats. Governor Mike DeWine appointed Deters last year to replace another justice, and he could have just run to keep his seat. But he decided to challenge Stewart instead. Why?
Well, it is a sort of an interesting intercourt battle between Stewart and Deters, who sit right next to each other on the bench. Deters got appointed by the governor in January 2023 to fill a vacancy that was left open when Sharon Kennedy moved up to be Chief Justice. Now, Deters would have to run statewide this year to retain that seat and run again in 2 years for a full term. So what's less fun than running statewide? Running statewide twice. And so Justice Deters opted to challenge his colleague, Justice Stewart, for the full 6-year term. And I think this is going to be his last statewide race because he'll be aged out after this 6-year term, assuming he gets it, and he would not be eligible to run again due to age limits. And, you know, it's interesting because I think Justice Stewart is pretty salty that Justice Deters decided to take her on. And, you know, Deters says, well, she was going to face a challenger no matter what.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting twist and a bit of a gamble for him to some extent, or maybe not, because if he loses, then he's off the court altogether.
Right. I think that it's probably, you know, it might be a good year for him to run because Trump's on the ballot and there's a new state law that requires partisan labels for candidates for appellate and Supreme Court seats, not for lower court races, but just for the higher up ones. And this will be the second cycle that's been in place, the first time that Trump's been on the ballot with that in place. And of course, you know, the last cycle when it was in place, the Republicans won.
How long has Stewart been on the court?
She's running for this. She's been on for almost 6 years. She was an appellate court judge for 12 years, and she's running for a second term.
Gotcha. In addition to that race, we have 2 other matchups that could help determine control of the court. Justice Michael Donnelly is facing Republican Megan Shanahan, who is a judge out of Hamilton County. And then there's an open seat on the court that is being fought over between Democrat Lisa Forbes and Republican Dan Hawkins. What do we know about these candidates?
Okay, so in the first case, I like to call it the Battle of the Irish. It's Donnelly versus Shanahan. Mike Donnelly is a Cleveland area Democrat. He's very vocal. He was on the Common Pleas Court for a long time before getting into his first term on the Supreme Court now. He supports the Criminal Sentencing Database Project and argues for transparency. He consistently votes with other Democrats on the court. Megan Shanahan is a Hamilton County Common Pleas Court judge, former prosecutor, and she's not real keen on the criminal sentencing database. And then the second matchup is what I call the newcomers matchup, and it's Cleveland area Democrat Lisa Forbes, who is in her first term on the 8th District Court of Appeals, previously had a lengthy career at a large law firm practicing corporate law, against Dan Hawkins, who's on the Franklin County Common Pleas Court now and formerly worked as a municipal court judge and handled a lot of environmental cases and has a background as a prosecutor as well.
And are Forbes and Hawkins technically running for Deters' seat?
Yes. So they are running for the seat left open by Deters' decision to take on Stewart. So there's a lot of musical chairs.
Yeah, what a tangled web. So control of the court is really important to both parties, especially after Ohio approved the abortion rights amendment last year. Do we have a sense of how these candidates would rule on abortion cases? I mean, they can't really come out and say, I oppose abortion access or I support abortion access.
Exactly. You know, there's all these restrictions that judges have, ethical kind of harnesses that they have. And so you won't hear them saying that. You'll hear them say, I will uphold my oath to abide by the Constitution. However, Ohio Right to Life endorsed the 3 Republicans, that would be Hawkins, Shanahan, and Deters, and Planned Parenthood and Abortion Forward endorsed the 3 Democrats, Donnelly, Stewart, and Forbes. So that might give voters an indication of which way the experts think they're going to be leaning on those abortion cases. And you're right, the court is most likely to decide a bunch of challenges to abortion laws and determine how that new reproductive rights amendment is applied.
And it'll be interesting to see, too, how many of these cases end up going before the Supreme Court. I would expect several of them because, you know, people will appeal and appeal and appeal. But there are so many abortion laws on the books that now have to be analyzed through the lens of this amendment.
Exactly. But I think you're right in that neither side is going to give up until it's come to the terminus.
For sure. And, you know, abortion obviously is not the only issue that the Supreme Court deals with. There are chicken wings, for example. What other cases do we think could go before the court in the coming years?
Well, it is interesting. Republicans have held a majority on the court since 1986, and it is a court that decides a lot of issues that impact everyday Ohioans, even though everyday Ohioans might not be aware of that. The Supreme Court interprets, you know, public records laws, how much transparency we have in government, how insurance policies are interpreted, how much electric and gas utilities can charge you on your monthly bill. So it is a pretty important court, and I hope people will pay attention.
I'm curious, too. We've seen a lot of backlash against the U.S. Supreme Court over decisions in recent years, especially the ruling to overturn Roe. A lot of people think so-called activist judges are trying to further an agenda, and I feel like there's a lot more scrutiny on the judicial branch than there used to be. I mean, is this happening in Ohio, too?
I think so. I think there's a big concern about trust in the judiciary at both the federal and the state levels, because we live in such a hyper-partisan time, and because the court will decide, you know, pretty key political questions such as, you know, gerrymandering and abortion, etc. And you do hear kind of an accusation that Republicans like to lob at Democrats that they're interested only in legislating from the bench. That means it's kind of like code words for bending the rules to get the result that they want rather than interpreting the law as written. You know, I don't know if it's fair criticism or not.
Well, definitely a lot to look at with these races. I highly encourage our listeners, if you haven't already, to check out Laura's reporting on our websites about the Supreme Court races. She did some very helpful profiles of the candidates that will help you make your decisions.
Don't forget to vote.
Ohio Politics Explained is brought to you by the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. You can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Ohio Explained.